My name is Naomi Carter, and I'm 32 years old. Looking back, I should have walked away that night. The moment Adrian smirked and turned my job into the joke of the evening, I should have recognized it for what it was. Not a careless comment, not a bad joke, not the kind of teasing couples laugh off on the drive home. It was a revelation. For one unguarded moment, he let the room hear what he had probably believed for a long time. He didn't respect me. Not as a woman, not as his partner, and not as someone worth defending when an audience was involved. But I didn't leave that night. Not immediately. I smiled instead. I lowered my eyes to my glass, let out a soft laugh, and gave him exactly what he expected: calm, composure, and no public resistance. I let him think I would absorb the insult the way I had absorbed smaller things before it. I let him believe I was still the dependable girlfriend who would smooth over discomfort so he never had to face it. Men like Adrian confuse restraint with weakness, and I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him absolutely certain he still understood me. Because by the end of it, that certainty was going to cost him everything. The night itself had started the way those evenings always did. Adrian had invited me to a dinner party at his friend Daniel's apartment, one of those polished gatherings where everyone pretended to be relaxed while quietly measuring careers, salaries, addresses, vacations, and social value. The lighting was warm, the glassware was expensive, the playlist was chosen to sound effortless, and every corner of that apartment seemed designed to make ordinary people feel slightly less impressive than they wanted to be. I never liked those nights. Adrian became a different version of himself around people like that. Sharper, more polished, more performative. He carried himself like he was always half a step away from the life he thought he deserved, and his friends encouraged that version of him because they were all doing the same thing. Still, I went because I loved him, or at least because I was still trying to believe that love meant tolerating environments that drained you if it made the other person happy. At first, the evening was harmless enough. Wine was poured. People exchanged small talk disguised as modesty. Someone mentioned a bonus. Another couple talked about moving into a better building. One woman went on too long about a luxury trip that had apparently been miserable, as if suffering in five-star hotels still counted as success. I smiled when expected, answered when spoken to, and waited for the night to pass. Then someone asked, from the far side of the table, "So, what does Naomi do again?" I barely looked up. I assumed Adrian would answer the way he always did when he wanted to sound respectable. Something vague but polite. Something that acknowledged I had built a serious career without dragging the details into a room full of people who wouldn't understand them anyway. But that wasn't what he said. He swirled his wine, leaned back in his chair, and smiled with that quiet arrogance he wore when he thought a room belonged to him. "Oh, Naomi," he said. "She just sits in a tiny cubicle pushing papers all day." The table broke into laughter. Not every single person, and not with the same intensity, but enough. Enough for the heat to climb the back of my neck. Enough for the moment to settle in my body before I had time to protect myself from it. One of his friends laughed and said, "Wait, seriously? So she's basically the administrative backbone of corporate misery?" Another added, "That explains why she's so calm. Spreadsheets will do that to a person." Adrian laughed too, more openly now that the room had approved the joke. "Pretty much. She types away while the real movers make decisions." That was the moment the humiliation changed shape. It wasn't only the insult, it was the ease of it, the instinct, the fact that he said it without hesitation, without discomfort, without even glancing at me to see whether I might be hurt. He spoke the way people speak when they're voicing something deeply familiar. The room hadn't created that opinion. It had only given him permission to reveal it. I could have embarrassed him right there. I could have set my glass down and told everyone exactly how much of our life had been supported by the same tiny cubicle he found so funny. I could have reminded him how many bills, plans, and emergencies had been made easier because I was steady, disciplined, and responsible in ways he had always taken for granted. But I didn't. I took a sip of my wine and said, "Yes, just a very boring little cubicle job." He glanced at me then, and something in his face softened with relief. He thought I was letting it go. He thought my composure meant he had gotten away with it. He thought because I didn't challenge him, I had accepted the role he had assigned me. What I actually did was go still. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, polished conversation, and the kind of subtle cruelty people call charm when it wears expensive clothes. Adrian touched the small of my back a couple of times like he was still playing the role of attentive boyfriend, and every time he did, something inside me pulled further away. By the time we got home, I wasn't confused anymore. I took off my heels, washed my face, and moved through the apartment with deliberate calm. Adrian loosened his collar, checked his phone, and made some lazy comment about Daniel's overpriced wine before glancing at me with a half-amused expression. You know they were just joking, right? I met his eyes in the bathroom mirror while I unfastened one earring. Of course, I said. That answer pleased him. I could see it. He kissed my forehead, drifted toward the bedroom, and carried himself as if the night had ended normally, as if respect had not just died in front of a table full of people. I stayed where I was a few seconds longer after he left. Then I looked at my reflection and admitted the truth to myself for the first time. He is not getting another version of me. What Adrian didn't know was that my life had already started shifting beneath the surface. For the past 6 months, my company had been restructuring, leadership changes, a major division being rebuilt, quiet internal moves that most people would never notice. I had been pulled into conversations above my level, trusted with work that mattered, and positioned for something far bigger than the role Adrian liked to mock. I was the leading candidate for a senior position. Higher authority, higher pay, full relocation across the country. I had known for weeks that if I wanted the job, it was mine. So standing there that night, with my earrings in my hand and Adrian's laughter still echoing in my head, I made my decision. I would take the promotion. I would take the city. And I would not take him with me. I didn't tell Adrian about the promotion. Not when my director pulled me aside and said, "Naomi, this is yours if you want it." Not when the paperwork began moving quietly behind the scenes. Not even when I received internal confirmation that my transfer would be finalized within weeks. I said nothing because by then I understood something important. If Adrian knew I was about to become the kind of woman he respected, he would change instantly. His tone would soften. His introductions would improve. He would begin performing admiration because suddenly my success would reflect well on him. I didn't want that version of him. I didn't want respect that appeared only after I became more useful to his ego. So I let him keep believing what he already believed, that I was stable, predictable, and not going anywhere. If anything, I became easier to live with, warmer, more attentive. I kissed him on the cheek before work. I asked about his day. I cooked dinner. I suggested we go out on weekends. I played my role so smoothly that he never once suspected the future had already started without him. That was the strange thing about Adrian. He only paid attention when he felt challenged. Comfort made him careless. As long as I stayed calm, he never looked closely. Around the same time, I started noticing changes in him. At first, they were subtle. Then they became impossible to ignore. He was on his phone more, but not in an absent-minded way. It was focused, guarded, slightly concealed. He stayed late at work more often, yet he never came home with the heaviness of someone who had actually been overworked. If anything, he seemed energized, entertained. Then he started mentioning Clara. The first time it sounded casual. "We have this new girl at work," he said one evening, scrolling through his phone. "You'd like her. She's funny." "I'm sure she is," I replied. He kept going. "She's in sales, really driven, not like people who get stuck in the same routine." The comparison was soft but deliberate. I let it pass. A few days later, he brought her up again while pouring himself a drink. "Clara just bought a new car, fully loaded, honestly kind of impressive." "That's nice," I said. He looked at me as if he expected more. Jealousy, defensiveness, something he could measure himself against. I gave him nothing. By the third time, he stopped pretending the comparison was accidental. "You could learn a thing or two from Clara," he said from the couch. "She's got real ambition." I closed my laptop and looked at him calmly. "I'm glad you're impressed." That answer unsettled him because he had expected me to compete. He wanted me to prove myself, to fight for my place, to reassure him that I was still trying to be chosen. What he didn't realize was that I had already removed myself from the competition. That was when the pattern became clear. Adrian wasn't only disrespecting me, he was testing how far he could lean toward another woman, while assuming I would still be there if he wanted to come back. He was exploring his options while keeping me in reserve. The realization didn't shatter me. Something had already broken at Daniel's dinner table. This only confirmed the shape of it. Meanwhile, my own timeline was tightening. The promotion was no longer a possibility. It was happening. HR began coordinating my transfer. My new office was preparing for me. There were confidential emails, late-night calls, housing documents, and strategic briefings that would change the direction of my life. Adrian noticed none of it, because in his mind, I was exactly where he had left me. So I began preparing quietly. I canceled the subscriptions linked to my accounts. I stopped covering the shared expenses I had been managing in the background. More importantly, I ended the automatic rent transfer that had been coming from me each month. Adrian paid his own personal bills, but the rent had been drafted from my account first, and he had gotten used to that arrangement without ever respecting what it meant. I didn't announce the change. I let the system do the talking when the time came. I also stepped back from the future. No more vacation talk. No more discussion about bigger apartments. No more half-serious remarks from him about engagement timelines that he only brought up when it made him feel secure. Emotionally, I withdrew just enough to create a shift without triggering suspicion. I responded a little slower, asked fewer questions, left more silence between us. Adrian interpreted that silence the way he interpreted everything else, as proof that nothing required his attention. A week before everything was finalized, I overheard him on the phone in the living room. "Yeah, she's great," he said. "Naomi's sweet, stable, but come on, she's not going anywhere. She's safe, no pressure. I can figure things out without losing anything." I stood in the hallway and listened. That was the final confirmation. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a safety net. By the time he ended that call, I had already made one thing very clear in my own mind. I was not going to confront him, argue with him, or explain myself into circles. I was going to leave so completely that by the time he understood what he had lost, there would be nothing left for him to reach for. By the end of that week, everything was in place. My new role, my relocation, my exit. And Adrian, completely unaware, was more comfortable than ever. The final week of living with Adrian felt quiet in a way I had never noticed before. Not because the apartment itself was quiet. On the surface, everything looked normal. He still came home late, dropped his keys on the counter, and talked about his day in scattered fragments that didn't really invite conversation. He still mentioned Clara every so often, as if her name belonged naturally in our life. But underneath that routine, something fundamental had changed. I was no longer inside the relationship. I was observing it. By then, my departure was fully scheduled. My start date was locked in. My housing in the new city had been arranged. My transition plan had already been sent over. The only thing left was the exit itself, and I handled that the same way I handled everything else, quietly. I started moving essential things out in stages. Documents first, then the clothes I could remove without making it obvious, then the practical items I would need immediately when I landed. By the middle of the week, most of what truly mattered to me had already been transferred out. What remained in the apartment were visible things, familiar things, things Adrian associated with me, not the things I needed to begin again. At the same time, I continued dismantling the structure he assumed would always hold. The rent date arrived. The payment didn't. That morning, Adrian frowned at his phone and called out from the living room. "Did the rent go through on your end?" I was in the kitchen pouring coffee. "I'm not sure," I said. "You should check with the landlord." He paused, mildly irritated rather than alarmed. "Yeah, I will." That was it. He still didn't understand what was happening, because to him, the failed payment felt like an inconvenience, not a signal. He was so used to the system working that he never questioned who had been keeping it functional. Later that night, he mentioned it again, but with less urgency. "Probably just a delay," he said, glancing at his phone. "These systems mess up all the time." "Probably," I said, and he let it go. Over the next few days, smaller things disappeared too. A streaming service no longer worked. A shared account logged him out. Another convenience vanished. Each time he reacted the same way: brief confusion, shallow annoyance, then dismissal. He never connected those losses to me, because that would have required him to see me as someone who had more control over our life than he had ever wanted to admit. Emotionally, I had already left. I moved through the apartment like a guest. I answered when spoken to, but I no longer carried the weight of the conversation. I no longer filled silence to protect him from it. Adrian noticed the difference just enough to comment on it one night. "You've been kind of distant lately." I looked up from what I was doing. "Just tired." He nodded almost immediately. "Yeah, work's been a lot, right?" For the first time, he came close to the truth without realizing it. "Something like that," I said. And because the explanation was simple, he accepted it. Simple explanations are a gift to people who don't want to look deeper. The morning I left, I woke before dawn, not in a dramatic rush, in complete clarity. I dressed slowly, choosing only what I had already set aside. The apartment was still, and Adrian was asleep when I passed the bedroom door. For a moment, I stopped and looked at him, not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to feel the truth of the moment without softening it. He looked exactly the same as he always had. Comfortable, unaware, certain in ways he had never earned. The man who laughed while I was humiliated. The man who thought I would always be there. The man who believed stability existed naturally around him, instead of understanding that someone had been building it in silence. I felt no anger then, only distance. I didn't wake him, I didn't leave a note, I didn't explain. By the time the sun was up, I was already at the airport. By the time Adrian rolled over and reached for his phone, I was in the air. And by the time his morning routine carried him into the day he thought would unfold like every other, I had already landed in a different city. He just didn't know it yet. Adrian didn't realize anything was wrong at first. That was the clearest proof of how completely he had misread our life. He woke late, stretched, glanced around the quiet apartment, and treated my absence as routine. I had left early before. I had managed mornings alone before. To him, the silence meant nothing. The first crack came when he opened his ride app to get to work. Payment declined. He frowned, tried again, and got the same result. Mild irritation flickered across his face, but not concern. He simply switched to his own card, confirmed the ride, and moved on. If he noticed the symbolism at all, it was only subconsciously. The convenience he had taken for granted was no longer cushioning him. By the time he got to work, he had more or less dismissed it. But then he checked his phone and saw no message from me. No good morning text, no check-in, nothing. Even then, he didn't call. He told himself I was busy. That was easier than admitting something felt off. Still, the discomfort stayed with him. It was small, but it didn't leave. By late morning, he made a decision that told me everything about how he thought of me even then. He went to my office, not because he was worried, but because he wanted reassurance. He wanted to see me exactly where he had left me, working my little cubicle job, still accessible, still available, still safely inside the life he had assigned me. The building looked the same as always. Glass exterior, controlled energy, clean lines. Adrian walked in with the quiet confidence of a man who expected the world to confirm his assumptions. Then he turned the corner and saw my desk. Empty. Not temporarily empty, not cleared for the afternoon. Completely gone. No laptop, no files, no personal items. In my place sat someone else, already settled, already working, already occupying the space where I used to be. For a moment, his mind refused the image. Then panic arrived. He scanned the floor as if I might reappear if he looked hard enough. When I didn't, he spotted one of my coworkers and forced his voice into something steady. "Hey, where's Naomi?" The coworker looked up. "She's gone." Adrian blinked. "Gone?" "Yeah, she got promoted. Big role. Transferred out last week. She's already in the new office." The words didn't land smoothly. They broke apart inside him. Promoted. Transferred. Already gone. He laughed once, but the sound was thin. "No, that doesn't make sense." My coworker frowned slightly. "It does. She's been working toward it for months." Months. That was the word that rearranged everything. The distance, the silence, the missed signs, the things he had dismissed as mood or routine. None of them had been random. They had been deliberate. "You sure?" he asked. My coworker gave him a strange look. "Yeah, she didn't tell you?" That was the moment Adrian finally understood the part that mattered most. I hadn't forgotten to tell him. I had chosen not to. He pulled out his phone immediately and typed, "Naomi, I just stopped by your office. I didn't know you were moving. Can we talk?" He sent it and waited. Nothing. He called. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Then my reply came through at last. "Don't worry, Adrian. I found a better opportunity. You understand, right?" He stared at that message because he recognized the meaning beneath it. I had taken the logic he lived by and handed it back to him in one clean sentence. I hadn't just left him. I had left him the way he deserved to be left, without warning, without access, and without the illusion that he still had time. Standing beside my empty desk, Adrian finally understood something he had never expected to feel. He wasn't the one with options anymore. Adrian didn't leave the building right away. He stood there staring at my message as if he could force another outcome out of it through repetition alone. But the silence after it was complete. Nothing about that day was going to reverse itself. Not the promotion he hadn't known about. Not the move he hadn't seen coming. Not the fact that I had walked away without giving him a final conversation to stand on. His first instinct was denial, wrapped in ego. He told himself it wasn't over. He told himself this could still be fixed if he said the right thing to the right person in the right tone. So he turned to his friends. Jessica answered his call first. He tried to make his voice sound wounded rather than desperate. "You will not believe what Naomi just did?" What? She asked flatly. She left, took a promotion, moved across the country, didn't even tell me. There was a pause, then Jessica exhaled softly. Yeah, she said. That sounds about right. Adrian stopped pacing. What does that mean? It means you pushed her too far. He frowned. This came out of nowhere. No, Jessica said. It didn't. He tried to reframe it. You know how we joke. It wasn't that serious. Jessica's laugh was sharp and humorless. Adrian, you humiliated her in front of people and acted completely comfortable doing it. Don't call that a joke just because you're the one who said it. He didn't know how to answer that. Jessica continued, quieter now, but colder. She supported you. Everyone knows that. And you treated her like she was just supposed to stay there forever. That line followed him even after the call ended, because it cut through the part of him that was still trying to pretend he was shocked. He called Daniel next and shifted his tone, trying to sound more rational. I think Naomi overreacted. Things weren't perfect, but leaving like that without saying anything? Daniel didn't answer immediately. She didn't overreact. Adrian let out a frustrated breath. Seriously? You've been underestimating her for a while, Daniel said. You just didn't realize it. It was the same truth in a different voice, and it landed just as hard. By the time Adrian got home that evening, the apartment no longer felt like his life. It felt like evidence. He opened the fridge and realized half the things he expected weren't there. He checked accounts and found services canceled, payments changed, access reduced. He looked around and understood, with growing unease, how much of the structure around him had quietly depended on me. That was when the panic shifted into something sharper. Fear. He had always believed he had options, that if one thing stopped serving him, he could redirect his attention elsewhere. So he reached for the possibility he had been testing all along. Clara. He texted her lightly. Hey, you free tonight? No answer for over an hour. Then, busy tonight, maybe another time. Not a rejection, but not an opening either. He stared at the message longer than he wanted to admit. Over the next few days, that pattern repeated. He reached out. She answered late, briefly, or not at all. And slowly he began to understand what had really been happening. Clara had enjoyed the attention, not the man underneath it. As long as he seemed safely attached to a stable life, he looked more desirable. Detached from that stability, he was just another man reaching. That realization hit him harder than Jessica's criticism or Daniel's calm disapproval, because it stripped away the fantasy entirely. He hadn't been choosing between options. He had been standing on one, and he had stepped off it. By the end of the week, the silence around him had become unmistakable. His friends were colder. Clara was distant. The apartment felt unfamiliar. The conveniences he once assumed were automatic now exposed how little he had understood the life he lived inside. For the first time in a very long time, Adrian had nothing to fall back on. Adrian didn't collapse in one dramatic moment. He unraveled in stages. The first few days after I left, he kept trying to reach me. At first, the messages were controlled. Hey, I think we should talk. Naomi, this feels like a misunderstanding. You didn't even give me a chance to explain. I read every one of them. I answered none of them. That silence disturbed him more than anger would have, because anger would have given him something to respond to. Silence offered no foothold, no way to redirect the conversation, no opening to smooth things over and preserve his image of himself. By the second day, the tone changed. Naomi, please. I know I messed up. I wasn't thinking that night. It didn't mean anything. I stared at that line longer than the others. It didn't mean anything. That was exactly the problem. Not because the dinner didn't matter, but because the disrespect came so naturally to him that he barely registered it as serious. He still thought this was about one moment, one joke, one badly handled night. He didn't understand that it was about every assumption beneath it, every dismissal, every quiet reduction of me into someone smaller so he could feel more important. The calls began that night. I watched the screen light up, then go dark. Again and again. By morning, there were 11 missed calls and 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. I already knew what they would contain. Apologies, explanations, fragments of sincerity shaped by the same entitlement that had created the damage in the first place. By the third day, his messages were longer and less controlled. I don't understand why you're doing this. We were fine. You're throwing everything away over one night. That was the moment I felt the final layer of clarity settle into place. Even now, he still didn't see me. He saw his own confusion, his own loss, his own inconvenience. He still believed the relationship had been intact right up until the moment I walked away. It hadn't been. It had ended the night I realized he enjoyed seeing me made smaller. On the 4th day, the calls peaked. 32 of them, back to back, as if persistence could recreate access. It couldn't, because by then I was already inside my new life. My office overlooked a completely different skyline. The pace of my days was sharper, more demanding, more alive. There were meetings that required my judgment, decisions that carried weight, responsibilities that belonged fully to me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't shrinking myself to preserve someone else's comfort. That was the part Adrian would never fully understand. He thought he missed me. What he really missed was access. Access to stability. Access to someone who absorbed pressure before it reached him. Access to a life that felt secure because another person had quietly held it together. And once that access was gone, there was nothing left for him to touch. The last message came late. "Naomi, please, I don't need anything. I just want to hear your voice. Just once." I read it. I sat with it for a moment, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain I felt nothing that would pull me backward. Then I deleted it. No reply, no closure, no final conversation to help him survive the consequences of losing me. Because closure is a kindness, and kindness is something he had withheld when it mattered most. Adrian spent years assuming I would always be there, always reachable, always willing to stay. Now he was the one left with silence. As for me, I never looked back. I was no longer the woman at Daniel's dinner table smiling through humiliation. I was no longer the woman in that apartment making myself smaller so a man could feel larger. I was no longer waiting for someone else to decide my worth. I had already done that for myself, and by the time Adrian understood what he had lost, I was already gone.